We're going to start the session now, so if I can have your attention, please. Hello. And welcome to this session here at the Wind and Solar Pavilion. Welcome to the Wind and Solar Pavilion for those of you who haven't been here before. Today we're talking about energy security and prosperity for the future in wind and solar power. So for those of you who have been around this place for a few days now, you will be very familiar with the framing of this event, which is all around security and prosperity and how renewables can bring forward the solution to the twin challenges of both the energy and the climate crisis. And we're joined today by some very illustrious speakers and then two panels which will explore this further. So without further ado, please let me introduce Ms. Ditte Juel-Jurgensen, who is the Director General for Energy at the European Commission. Over to you, Ditte.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for the kind invitation. Thank you very much. Thank you for welcoming me here. I've been looking forward to coming here because renewable energy, wind and solar, are really at the center of what we are trying to do in Europe in aligning our response to the energy crisis and to the climate crisis to make sure we all go in the right direction as part of the energy transition to respond to both crises. So I would like to say a few words about that. And to outline how do we see the process, how do we see the role of renewables, and how are we trying to facilitate the acceleration and the scaling up of renewable wind and solar across the European Union. So maybe let me say a few words about the context, the global context and the European context, and then a few words about what are we doing to respond to that, how are we approaching it. Now, we are in a global energy crisis. The Russian invasion into Ukraine and the fact that Russia has disrupted its pipeline gas flows to the European Union, that has essentially taken about 80 billion cubic meters of fossil gas out of the global energy market. It has removed it from Europe, but it has also removed it from the global energy market because these were pipeline gas flows that cannot just go elsewhere. So we in Europe have looked at, well, how do we respond to that? What do we do as that energy, as those molecules disappear from the global market? The way we approach it is what we call Repower EU, and that is essentially our response, our energy response primarily to the Russian manipulation and weaponization of energy markets. It builds on three components. The first is we need to reduce our overall energy consumption. We need to use less by energy savings, energy efficiency, and really accelerating our investments into that. The second pillar is renewables, wind and solar in particular. So we need to scale up renewables and we need to accelerate the investments into renewables so that we reach not just our targets much sooner, but we scale up our targets and become more ambitious for what can we do over the coming years, what can we do by 2030, and how do we get to 2050 and to climate neutrality as we have committed to doing. And then the third aspect of our Repower EU is to say, well, where we cannot replace it by reducing our consumption, where we cannot replace by renewables, then we need to diversify our supplies of molecules of fossil gas, but we also need to replace that fossil gas by biomethane, so by clean molecules rather than fossil molecules. So those are the three pillars, of Repower EU. Since we're here to talk about renewables, about wind and solar, I will focus on that pillar, which really is central both to the Repower EU, but also central to the European Green Deal, central to how we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 55% in 2030, and central to how do we become climate neutral in 2050. So we had already had ambitious targets for renewable energy as part of the European energy system. And last year we submitted proposals for how do we get to 55% greenhouse gas emission reductions by 2030, and what does that mean for renewables? So we suggested a target of 40% by 2030, almost a doubling of where we are now in terms of the renewable share of our overall energy system. With Repower EU, with the Russian war on Ukraine, and with the disruptions in the global energy market, we have taken that further and we have suggested a 45% target for renewables in the European energy system by 2030. We think it is doable, it's ambitious, it will require investments, it will require investor certainty, it will require the right regulatory frameworks, but it is doable if we do that across the European Union with global partners and of course with the renewables industry. Now that's the target, and the question is then, what do we do? What are the specific measures to achieve the target? And here we've put in place a number of proposals. I'm not going to go into great detail, but just to outline what are the main elements. The first element is if we identify what have been the obstacles so far. One key obstacle in the rapid rollout of renewable energy is permitting. In most places in Europe, and I guess globally as well, permitting typically takes too long. You have a project, you have the financing ready, you know where you want to place the project, and then you go through a lengthy permitting procedure that essentially delays the rollout. So we already have in the European Union rules for permitting and for how to accelerate permitting. And what we have now suggested is to further accelerate that, to really strengthen the requirements on local authorities, on national authorities, and on European authorities for how quickly can you do permitting. So if you have a project, let's get through the permitting process easily, swiftly, so that the project can go ahead and replace, once again, the fossil molecules by renewable energy. Just last week, we took it even further. We are in an emergency, we are in an energy crisis, as well as the climate crisis. And what we suggested was an emergency proposal to speed up even more permitting under our emergency procedures. And the way we did it is to say, well, we have to recognize that renewable energy is an overriding public interest. It is something we need to do. And again, for climate, for energy security, but also for clean air and for many other advantages for us as societies, for our economies, and for jobs. So we have now suggested a further strengthening of permitting rules that we're looking to put in place as an emergency measure at this point in time, recognizing again the overriding public interest of renewables in our societies and in our energy system. That is, I think, the key element, because permitting is so crucial and those delays are really a problem. In addition to that, we are clarifying the rules around power purchasing agreements, around the contracts for difference, so that the industry, the operators, the market operators have certainty and security for what happens when they invest, what are the prices they can sell at, how does this market develop. This has been a request from the industry, it's been a request from member states, from operators, to say we need to have the certainty. And that certainty around power purchasing agreements and contracts is even more important at this time where energy prices are extremely volatile. So you have high prices, which you would think is an interest of industry, but everyone can see that these high prices and this volatility is not sustainable. So if we can create more stability, more predictability for investors, for financial operators, then that is a good thing today. Financing is obviously critical in rolling out renewable and in accelerating the renewables rollout. So we're doing things on the financial side as well. We have, first of all, clarified what constitutes a green investment. We have got what we call the taxonomy, and clearly that helps incentivize investors and financial flows to go into those green sectors like renewable energy, wind and solar. We're also making available significant additional public funds, European funds, and national funds, including under what we call our recovery and resilience facility. So it was originally targeted at how do we get out of the COVID crisis, how do we rebuild, how do we start our investments again, how do we get back after the COVID lockdown. That recovery and resilience has now become also recovery and resilience as a response to the energy crisis as part of our Repower EU, because we're going to need to accelerate investments again, both to get out of the current crisis, but also to make sure that we keep our path, that we align ourselves with a strategic objective of becoming climate neutral in 2050 and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 55% in 2030. So those are some of the main things we're doing in renewable energy. We also have a solar rooftop initiative that facilitates investments there and incentivizes investments there. So I could speak for hours, but I'm not going to do it. I will bore you with that. So these are just the main elements of what we're doing. But again, renewable energy is really at the center of our Green Deal, of our climate ambitions, and of how we want to address the energy crisis that we are currently in. Thank you very much for that. Rebecca, back to you.
Thank you so much to Ms. Jurgensen for her comments, and really exciting to hear more about the Commission's plans for accelerating permitting. In the spirit of speed and urgency of the renewables rollout, we're going to go straight on, and let me introduce my next guest speaker, who is Simon Ben-Maraz. And we've been working very closely with Simon and his team at IRENA in launching the Global Offshore Wind Alliance. But Simon today is going to talk to us about renewable energy transforming the global electricity mix from 2030 to 2050. So over to you, Simon.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and a very good morning to everyone. My name is Simon Ben-Maraz. I'm part of the IRENA team working with member countries. IRENA is an international organization, 168 countries, member of IRENA, meaning we work with the champions of renewables, but also countries we want to access this new form of energy. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give you today a short overview of what is needed to achieve the objective of the Paris Agreement by 2030, and what are the levers to activate for 2050. Next slide, please. Yes, please. So the first important aspect is that renewables play an integral part in reducing emission by half by 2030, but also achieving net zero by 2050. Solutions come by various technical avenues. Roughly half of it will come from renewables combined with energy efficiency. Also, we're seeing more and more traction for the use of hydrogen in end-use application. And of course, electrifying sectors will come into play. And of course, at the end, to reduce emission in the hard-to-habit sectors, form of carbon capture and storage. Next slide, please. So this comes, I forgot to mention, this comes from our yearly analysis, the World Energy Transition Outlook, which really mapped out the pathways toward achieving 2050 net zero targets. When we saw the pictures with our member countries, we saw that there is some progress. You can see here the progress on renewables, both on the share of renewables in the power sector, but also the use of bioenergy consumption. So those are showing some progress, but you see as well in other aspects, including energy efficiency, electrifying end-use sectors, the use of hydrogen, and so on, the progress is not so substantial. So there is a lot of work to push policies to a radical shift, because we cannot wait 2050 to change. We need action in the next 7 years to achieve those ambitious targets. Next slide, please. So, of course, 2050, a lot of countries are today using the Paris Agreement to chart the pathway toward net zero. This is the so-called long-term low emission development strategies. But to work with them, you need to see what will be the picture by 2030. So very importantly, what we see as a trend is a rapid ramping of renewables and more aggressive energy efficiency strategies in a lot of countries, because this is the most realistic pathway to halve emission by 2030. So in the indices, which are updated every 5 years, we see more and more those two aspects being integrated as a strong policy, but also as a conditional part to access climate financing. And of course, decarbonizing end use will come with a form of integrating renewables as a direct supply, both on the power and heat part, but also using other vectors like green hydrogen to decarbonize the hard-to-abate sectors. Next slide, please. This is the 2050 views, where we see a lot of renewable ramping up toward 2030. Renewables will go up to 65% of the total power supply. And of course, we here at the Solar and Wind Council, we see the major and very important technology, wind, both offshore and onshore, being one of the largest generation sources there. And of course, all the solar technology, including PV, CSP, and so on, also taking the lion's share. Next slide, please. The main driver today, IRENA tracks more than 50,000 different projects to see what are the cost trajectories. both on solar and wind and other technology, we see that there is a rapid decrease of cost over the years. Between 2010 and 2021, the cost of solar PV has reduced by more than 80%. So those are the drivers, those are the information country needs to include more renewables in their NDCs and in the future their LTLEDs, the long-term low emission development strategies. Next slide, please. Also importantly, we need to provide evidence that this tracks with the auctions or the power mechanism that country needs to implement. The good news is that we see that the cost reduction, so the material reduction of those technology are tracking with the auction prices. And that's a very good news because that shows a sign for countries to implement more of those policies to accelerate the adoption of modern form of renewable energy. Next slide, please. So, of course, we talk about power generation, but the hidden giant are the end users. Buildings, transport, and industry will need credible, bankable solution to electrify their end users. So here as well, we see a lot of renewable power taking the use in end uses. Here, example, more and more heat pumps. We heard about the Director General about Repower EU. The EV adoption in many countries are also more and more integrated in climate plans. And of course, the heat pump use in industry as well are more and more integrated. Next slide, please. I want to start shortly, but very importantly, of course, there is a discussion about the dispatchability or the interdependency of renewables. There needs to be work to be done to integrate more of the solution in a modern power grid. So not only we need to talk about the generation technology, but also addressing the bottlenecks on the transmission and distribution. And here as well, we see a lot of potential for country to integrate what we call the flexibility of the modern power system, integrating variable and dispatchable solutions. So not only we need wind, solar PV, but we need the nice dispatchable solution, bioenergy, geothermal, solar CSP, and so on. And of course, in markets, there need to be discussion about whether we extend the grid or we integrate more off-grid solution. Next slide, please. I think I will stop here because, of course, we are the COP27, COP of implementation. We had wonderful discussion around what does it take to integrate and how country can adopt those solutions. One of the important keywords is the resilience of energy system. So when we are discussing with countries to adopt those new form of solution, we need to integrate the discussion around resilience. We see the example in Mozambique, in the Philippines, in Tonga, where renewable play a vital role to bring the power back. And those are very important mechanisms to convince countries, because not all countries have adopted renewable in their climate plan, to demonstrate that they have credible, viable environmental and societal benefits. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Simon. I just want to give the audience an opportunity to ask any clarification questions that they might have about the presentation. No? Okay, it was all well understood. Thank you so much, Simon, for that. And now we'll move on without further ado to our panel section. So if we can welcome the panel now to the stage. So first of all, we have Maggie Pakula, who's Senior Vice President of Strategy at Invenergy. Maggie, do you want to come on up? Then, yeah, please sit wherever you want. Yeah. Then we have Chris Antonopoulos, who's CEO of Lucala Power. And we'll welcome them all as a group when they all take to the stage. Ben Backwell, CEO of GWEC. Louisa De Moro, who's Global Head of Energy Transitions at BNEF. And I think in a slight change to the schedule, we also have Jose Donesso, who will come to this panel as well. Do you want to... Great. So let's give him a round of applause and a welcome to the stage. Fantastic. So in this panel, we're going to talk about evolving policy and power markets to accelerate renewable energy to 2030. So I'm sure the panel have lots of ideas of how exactly we should do that. And let's get started straight away. So perhaps, actually, Louisa, I'll come to you first, because BNEF has a big remit, obviously looking globally at the energy transition from an analytical point of view. And it'd be really good to hear a bit more about your thoughts on what progress we're seeing this year at COP and what progress we're seeing in general, and where you think we are when it comes to scaling grid-scale renewables.
Thank you so much. I've been at COP since day one, and I think, like most people that have been here for the whole time, I've had moments of being very hopeful, very hopeless, and everything in between.
Yeah.
And this is because every story has a good side and a bad side. And this is true when we look at energy transition and the pathways to take us there. Today, we launched one of BNEF's flagship report in the morning, which is Climate Scope, that I believe many of you know, where we track almost 140 countries in the world, make data public to ensure that investment can flow without the data barrier. And one really good news that Climate Scope brought this year is that when we look at country commitments, when we look at renewable energy targets, nearly all of the countries in the world now have a target to grow energy consumption and energy supply. And this is huge, because that wasn't the story many years ago. Many years ago, our headlines were, this is lacking. And this is especially more impressive when we look at emerging markets. About 93% of the over 100 emerging markets that we look at have an energy targeting force. But this is the implementation COP. And the rest of it is still lacking. And as we know, the data points to an off-track direction. This is why we need to have those discussions. As we heard, there are challenges around getting permission to start projects. We also, when we look at Africa and emerging markets in general, we see lack of understanding of domestic banks that needs to be addressed to help investments flow. We see lack of planning of grid infrastructure and electrification, as well as other things. And especially when we look at cogeneration, and the fact that cogeneration between 2020 and 2021 has jumped about 8.5%, and it's only likely to increase more. I think we can see why those conversations are so important.
Thanks so much, Louisa. I think that sets the scene really nicely. And maybe we'll go to Ben now, because Ben, I know you have thoughts on this topic. So are we implementing? I mean, Louisa said there about targets rising, but what's the deal? Why are we not seeing more renewable energy on the ground deployed in the countries that need it?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. And for those of you who have been here since the beginning, I hope you've had your coffee and been eating your fruit and vegetables. We're almost there, a few more days, and a particularly important day today at Energy Day. I want to be kind of fairly kind of blunt. There's a lot of positive things to celebrate. One is the targets, as people have pointed out, have risen very, very strongly. There's a political consensus and support that we've never had before as an industry, and I'm very, very happy about that. And we can see that consensus having been built. We're seeing a very strong response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with even more urgency from policymakers and planners around building renewables. And we have, as Simon pointed out, we have world-beating costs for our industry, which 10 years ago we didn't have, and we can compete comfortably with any industry around the world in terms of power, at least. So that's the good news. I guess what I'm worried about is implementation, and are we going fast enough? And we clearly are not. For us as an industry, I think we need to be at something like 8 terawatts by 2050. We're going to install just under 100 gigawatts this year. We thought we would reach the 100 this year. I don't think we will. I think we'll be slightly under it because some countries are underperforming. And if you look at the trajectory we should be on, we should probably be on about 3 or 4 times faster on an annual basis. And the IEA considers that we should be at 390 gigawatts annually by 2030. And we can't go from 95 or whatever it is to 390 in a single year. I mean, there needs to be a ramp up, and there needs to be a ramp up of the supply chain. So are we going fast enough? No, we definitely are not. Are we phasing out coal? And obviously we were at Glasgow and it was about making coal history. My understanding is that 2022 will be a record year for coal, partly because of the European countries turning coal back on again, and partly because of China having had a very serious drought in the southern provinces, in Sichuan, which has led to them turning on their coal plants and ramping up their coal production. So it will be a record year for coal, and that hasn't come out of this COP because I guess maybe people are delaying to produce their reports. So I just want to give it that context. First of all, we need to speed up, and simply things are too slow, and there's a few reasons for that, I think, which we can go in later on in the panel. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Ben. And certainly what we're seeing here is there is a lot of focus on the phase out of coal, I think, at COP, as both our panelists so far have said. But I wouldn't say yet that we've seen a similar focus on scaling up renewables. So the conversations still seem quite separated in a way that I really, truly believe they shouldn't be. So we're here in Egypt. We're at the COP of Africa. And let's turn now to Chris from Lekela, because major developer here in Egypt and across Africa. And Chris, I really want to get into this challenge from an African perspective. I think the barriers are quite different here, and it would be great to hear you elaborate more on what's holding Africa back from scaling up clean energy.
Thanks a lot, Rebecca, and good morning, everyone. I think most of you probably know us, Lekela, the largest pure play renewable energy company in Africa. Now, as we all know, Africa is actually the most vulnerable continent. At the same time, Africa is the continent who has natural resources second to none. Solar, wind, much better than Europe or other places, no doubt. But at the same time, and I don't want to bother you with too many numbers, more than 80% of the energy mix is basically on hydrocarbons. And if you look how much of is really renewables in Africa, it's only 6%, 3% wind, 3% solar. That's all there is, despite this fantastic natural resources. So you would ask, well, why is that the case? Well, I think first, let me start with enablers. I mean, the beautiful thing is that costs have come down, as we heard before, quite dramatically. Right now, particularly in Africa, nobody can say that renewables are more expensive than other sources of generation. No, it's quite the opposite. It's by far now the most competitive sources, right? What is really missing, and here we come to the barriers, is the the framework, basically. The most important item, to be very honest with you, is the fact that more than 90% of the utilities in Africa are really not creditworthy. Let's face it, they have all issues, therefore high debts, and actually on a standalone basis, they would be bankrupt, the way we look at it. So therefore, very, very difficult to finance them unless there is a governmental guarantee. And of course, I know this is a challenge for many governments, but if you look at the countries who are successful, countries like South Africa, Egypt here, and others, they do give governmental guarantees, although it's very difficult for them. Unfortunately, for large projects, that's what's going to be required with respect to this. All of the countries in Africa currently have targets in the energy mix which are 20 to 40% being renewable, right? And typically now most of them are really single digit. I've heard or I've read that it will take not 4 times, Ben, but 10 times of the investment to get up to the levels that the governments want. 10 times. Right? That means there has to be a paradigm shift. It cannot continue like this. We will never reach those levels if we continue like this. So it is important that the governments not only talk about this, but really push the renewable agenda forward. And what I always say is, governments, please copy with pride. There are places around which have been successful, like Egypt, like South Africa, Morocco, other places. Just do the same. Go for it if you really want to achieve your targets by 2030. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And maybe the last thing I want to say, in what I have seen and what we are also leaders in this in Africa, it's not only about electrons. It's not only about providing electrons. It's being a integral part of the economic and socio-economic development there. Is much more needed than in other places of the world. So what we are doing and other companies are also doing, we see half of the work being to help the local community develop during the time when we are there. So we are spending, for instance, quite a lot of money from our revenues going back to the community, helping out with all kinds of things, not only energy, but biodiversity, in creating jobs, improving education, improving health conditions, etc. And that's really the way forward, the way I see it in Africa.
Thank you, Chris, for those thoughts. I think there's a lot to unpack there, and hopefully we can just circle back around in a moment or two. But I just want to bring in Maggie now. So Maggie, Invenergy are a huge developer in the US. Do you want the microphone? And I know that you guys have recently been awarded a lease for the New York Bight, record-breaking prices in that auction.
Indeed.
But I want to tease out this thread about investment. So I think it's fair to say that the challenges in Africa are a bit different to the challenges that we see in markets like the US. And certainly in terms of investment, there are potentially, there's a lot of capital circulating that wants to find its way into offshore wind. So I'm really interested in how you see the barriers and how they're distinct from what Chris described, but also maybe the similarities in this need to build an economic and social value around the projects that you're taking forwards.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for a little bit of background, Invenergy is an independent power producer, mostly focused in North America, where we are really starting to grapple with the need to scale up from what we're doing right now to either that 4 or 10x that we think is going to be needed for this transition with the passage of the IRA. As Rebecca mentioned, we just won a quite expensive lease in the New York Bight off the coast of New York to build a large-scale offshore wind farm there, which will really be the beginnings of an industry that needs to be supported by supply chain, needs to be supported by all of the components that go into developing in the US a local domestic offshore wind platform, which really hasn't existed in the US to date. So bringing everything from Europe to the US is going to certainly be a challenge there. How do we get so I guess to your question of how is this different than some of the challenges that Chris faces, in a lot of ways there are similarities. I mean, creditworthiness, finance, there's still a lot of risk on these projects at the end of the day. That level of the fundamentals of finance aren't different. And I'm sure some of the same challenges exist on the development side of things, which are the permitting pathway is extremely long. Even though the US has a well-established set of regulations for grid interconnection, it's still not necessarily easy to interconnect this much capacity into a coastal region. And I think that access to grid, associated transmission infrastructure, having clear and viable permitting processes that are going to work on a timeline to actually get these projects built is something that probably applies globally. I mean, certainly it applies through the development that we're doing throughout Europe. I'm sure it applies very much to the same extent in Africa and other global south type countries, but where the financing requirement might be a little bit easier. Was there one question I missed? I don't think so.
Was there one question you missed?
Did I miss a question?
I think
Joyce?
you've kind of all
Okay.
you've answered it all in the round, and maybe we'll draw out some themes in the Q&A section. But maybe I'll go to Jose now. From the solar perspective, and you can speak to whichever continent you want to cover. But what are you seeing globally around the barriers to rapid expansion of solar power, particularly from a markets perspective?
Yeah, solar power in this moment at global scale is scaling up very fast. But at global scale, not in all the countries of the world. Still, there is countries that are not going in the right path, how my colleague says before. And the good news is that the main driver of this scaling up is not environment, is competitiveness of our sector. This means in this moment, to be in favor of renewable energy, particularly wind or solar, doesn't mean a cost for the society. It's an advantage. It's an economical opportunity, a big economical opportunity for the countries with a good resource in sun and in land. And we are seeing that there are many countries that are increasing this target to 2030 in an impressive way, as Germany, that duplicated. We hope that in Spain, for instance, will increase the targets to 2030, but we need to increase all these targets in most of the countries. We need to accelerate the decarbonization. It's clear. But we need to face still important challenge. First one, permitting process. In many countries, still, or most of the countries, I must say, not in all the countries, still is a major barrier in the acceleration. We need not to do one system of permitting less exigent, because a good system of permitting is the warranty to the society that our plants are installed in the right place. But we need a more rational system, and we need more human resource for the administration bodies that need to evaluate to do the assessment of the project to accelerate. Yeah. 1 year that we lost in the permitting phase means 1 year with more CO2 that we can avoid. We have another very important challenge. Don't lose the social acceptance of our technology. We need to do the things in the right way, in the social integration, environmental integration, to avoid to lose the social acceptance. We have the important challenge too is the integration in the grid. We need to advance technologically in the way to give to the society an electricity with the same quality and the same predictability than the former conventional ones technology. Yeah. We are now the conventional ones. We need new systems of reward of the we need to reform the marginalist system. We need to advance in storage. We need to advance in hydrogen. We achieve all this challenge. We'll achieve the targets that Irene exposed before, and I think we'll go farther on these targets, even in 2030.
Great, thank you for that. Clear clarion call there for acceleration and some specifics about how to do that exactly. So I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions now. This is your time, and I will pick on people if there's absolutely no questions. So you're not safe. I will find you and ask you to ask a question. So come on, let's have it for our audience. Who would like to ask a question to the panel? No? Yes, gentleman there. Can you introduce yourself when you speak, please?
Thank you very much. My name is Jose Puyana. I'm the head of Colombia's investment promotion agency. So my role here is to position Colombia as the right destination for the development of wind and solar projects. Looking at the development and the speed with which this sector is evolving around the world, South America in general is lagging behind, and there is significant investment, significant incentives. There's great opportunities if you look at sort of the intensity of wind and solar, in particularly Colombia, which is on the equator. My question very simply would be to potentially most of the speakers, what would we need to do to convince more developers and more finance people to actually take the lead and invest in this part of the world? That would be my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. So on Colombia, who would like to take that one? You want to go first, Ben, and then we'll come to Jose.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that question. Colombia is actually a country that's very close to our hearts in the Global Wind Energy Council at the moment, and we were very lucky to have the Minister Irene Vélez here the other day. And Colombia has also joined the Global Offshore Wind Alliance, which we will kind of launch again this afternoon with Irina and Denmark and many other countries. And we've been working in Colombia now for quite a number of years, both developers with projects that took quite a long time to come to gestation, and now with offshore wind as well. And it's really, I mean, I think there's two things. I mean, the wind potential, as you say, and solar potential is fantastic. Colombia's had a history in the energy sector, both as a coal exporter and also as a gasoline exporter as well. And that political momentum is there now. It seems to have a full transition, so we really welcome that. And I think Colombia is going to be one of the hotspots. I mean, it's really well placed on the Caribbean as well. I think it's can move fast now with offshore wind in particular. Obviously, onshore La Guajira has got enormous resources. Having said that, there's quite a lot to get right. It took a while to get the onshore regulatory scheme together. I think there was kind of over complication for a while, which we helped, I think, the government simplify and clarify. And I think for offshore wind, there's a sense now that the government wants to move forward very quickly and with a lot of clarity. And as you know better than I do, getting the politics right, I think it's really important, and bringing communities along is really, really important, particularly in somewhere like La Guajira, where there's many, many indigenous communities. It's really, really important that community relations side is done really well, and that communities are brought into the process right from the beginning. I mean, just very quickly on the rest of Latin America, why aren't people investing more? It's really because of the stop-start nature of development there. I mean, you look at Mexico, we used to be in Mexico all the time, and our developers were doing really, really well there. And we're producing energy at really economically competitive prices. I think we had projects there at $17 a megawatt hour, some of the most competitive prices in the world. We were supplying corporates, we were bringing in loads of investment, we were renovating the power sector, and then a new government comes in, and for whatever, for reasons I won't go into, they've stopped it. And that holds up investment for years and years. In Argentina, we were there, we built two turbine factories, we had 2 or 3 really good years, then the economic crisis hit, convertibility was suspended, and then the whole thing stops for a few years. So there hasn't really been that continuity in some places. One exception is Brazil, where Brazil has consistently grown. They have fantastic market design, really strong regulators, very strong corporate PPA markets. So there's a mixture between tenders and private PPAs, and that gives the market a lot more resilience. But what I am seeing now, I think, is a lot of hope, because we have Chile that's very strongly committed. We have Colombia that's very strongly committed. We have Brazil, which will be even more committed under the new government. And I think that will really create a lot of momentum in Latin America and bring some of the kind of hesitant, naysaying countries kind of back into a development pathway, and also a lot more cooperation between the countries. So thank you.
Thank you. I know that Louisa wanted to come in as well.
I have two. Colombia in my heart, close to my heart, at personal basis and the solar basis. Colombia has a very important resource from the solar point of view, at utility scale and the decentralized use of energy too. In both sense, have an important resource. What Colombia needs, that any other emerging market needs if they want to develop, as Ben says before. In this moment, there is a lot of capital available in the world. There is particularly at this moment, infinite possibilities to invest. And the most interesting, the most exciting markets until now are quite full of projects. And investors are looking for another markets, attractive markets, but they are looking for legal certainty, first of all. A right regulatory framework that allow the PPAs, that give this certainty to the investors, a rational permitting process. There are three key aspects, and particularly political stability. Does not mean that the same party can continue, but for different parties or the major political parties in the country to decarbonization, to change the electrical model, must be a social agreement, something that is outside of the political discussion of every day. If you do that, I'm not sure Colombia will be able to capture very big investment. Our sector will be very happy, and we have already many companies looking for projects in Colombia, but it's sure that you will receive much more companies if they perceive this political willingness to go ahead with the process.
Thank you, and over to you, Louisa.
I'm so glad you asked this question because this gives me the opportunity to say something that I think is super relevant. As I mentioned, we launched Climate Scope this morning, a couple hours ago, and Colombia actually ranks 4 in terms of attractiveness for clean energy investment. And this highlights what the country has done over the past few years and what we expect the country to do in short future. And I think that also provides an example of what steps to take to open doors for private capital. So Colombia was a market that we saw for many, many years, very high interest from private investors. And it was a market that they were ready to start looking at. Government, after a while, and after some trials and errors, managed to implement good auctions and to adjust some regulations that allowed investors to feel confident about the market. And there's some, fully agree with Ben, consistency is one of the key factors. And once the country starts proving to investors that this is a place to go, it's stable, you have the right partners on board, we believe that it can be one of the key markets in the world for clean energy investment.
Great, thank you, Louisa. So we're out of time for this panel, but I just want to get the panel in one sentence to say what they think is the key thing that's going to accelerate renewables. So start with Jose and we'll work that way. One sentence, key thing that will accelerate renewables.
Oh, sorry, I would like first to complement my answer of before. I spoke
very quickly.
I says that we have a situation of infinite liquidity in financial market, but this situation is changing. Now the interest rates are increasing, the price of the money is increasing. That means that the concurrence for good projects, the concurrence between different markets to capture the investment is a new phase of the sector that we need to face. Then the countries need to do the things in the right way to capture this investment that until now in the last year was not happening. And answer your question, political willingness. We are a political willingness and social acceptance.
Okay.
Take care of social acceptance. We are a regulatory sector. We depend on decision makers, and the decision makers depend, at least in democratic society, on the opinion of the electors. And then we need to take care of both things.
That was one very long sentence said without a breath. Over to you, Chris.
I tried to be a little more brief. I think we've heard that the main thing is commitment, political commitment, but this is not only words. It is about action. And one of the key actions that I've seen in my market in Africa is in those countries where the government has established a separate organization to foster renewables. This is the countries currently which have gone through. South Africa, the IPP office, Egypt, NREA, Morocco, Mazen, and so forth. Those countries have gone forward. But where you go the old way with the utility, sometimes the utility sees the IPPs as a competitor, not as a partner. And I think that needs to change.
Good point. Thank you for that one. Louisa?
I would say collaboration between policymakers, development banks, and private sector, in which each of those stakeholder groups actually understand what is the best role that they can play and what others need to kick off markets.
Over to you.
I am not just copying everybody else's answer, but I mean, truly politically resilient policy that's going to give price certainty is the number one thing. I think we're going to figure out supply chain. Developers are ready to rise to the challenge of scale. I think that the banks are going to figure out a way to do this too. They're getting more and more pressure to do so. So,
Thanks, Maggie.
That's a sentence.
I think that counts as one, yeah. And over to Ben.
very good one.
If I have to figure one, it's don't make this all about making renewables cheaper and cheaper. This is not just about price. This is about social value. It's about the transition. It's about putting on large amounts of renewables very, very quickly now. We don't have time. And it's not, we're already cheaper than fossil fuels. So it's not about squeezing more money and getting to the lowest possible price. About renewables, it's about the value and the importance of everything that we need to do now in these next few years.
Thank you for that, Ben. And join me in giving this panel a big round of applause. Thank you. So next, please do stay, because we've got an announcement about planning for the Climate Commission. So I believe Ben is going to stay here.
Jonas is going to say.
Yeah, you're going to stay. Jonas is going to come up. And so is Eddie. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Too many mics to hand out.
Great. So thank you, everyone. So we mentioned earlier in the panel discussion that planning is one of the biggest barriers we face around the world, and the European Director General for Energy for the Commission also made most of her intervention around that. Perhaps one point of information around what the DG Energy said around these emergency measures. As far as we understand from Giles Dixon, who was here earlier, I mean, this is a very, very positive development, but it only applies to new projects, does not apply to the 100 gigawatts of projects which are currently in planning. So a very important point of information there. But I'm going to hand it over to Jonas to talk about the Planning for Climate Commission, which we hope can resolve a lot of these issues.
Thank you, Ben, and everyone. Absolutely. So today we're launching the Planning for Climate Commission. It's a collaboration between our various organizations, by GWEC, by International Hydropower Association, and the Green Hydrogen Organization, and Long Duration Storage Council. The Commission will have a number of high-profile members, and the Global Solar Council, of course, and we've got Gianni there. Absolutely, sorry about that. We'll have a number of high-profile people, including the Green Hydrogen Organization's chairman, Malcolm Turnbull, who's also on the IHA board. We have Matt Snipper, the CEO of Ørsted, and of course, we've got Elbia here in the room from Brazil. We will have strong support from a number of governments. It has just come in from Teresa Ribera, Deputy Prime Minister of Spain, that they are on board, and more will follow. This will be a truly multi-stakeholder effort with people from across the world. We have indigenous communities represented, wide spectrum. Because this is, of course, as Secretary General of the UN have said on many occasions, this is mission critical aspect in terms of fighting climate change and making sure that renewables play their role. And it's not just about faster and more efficient planning. It is faster and more efficient, fit for purpose planning, while at the same time consulting and bringing communities along. That second part of this equation is absolutely critical. How do we make sure that we make it happen quickly and fast while building trust? It is that balancing act we need to do. And one of the things that we hope to do is now to put the focus on this issue, raise the profile and attention of the issue, and share amongst governments and countries good practices in how to address this. There are ways in which we can do this, not just more efficiently, but there are creative ways in which we can make people like our wind turbines, our solar panels, and so on, in ways that we're not today, and realize that this is part of infrastructure that our society depends on and should live with. So we hope that we will generate a battery of good practices, of ways that we're living together with this, that we can more rapidly share globally. So those are some of the things we hope that the Commission will be doing. So, Eddie, maybe you can explain from your perspective, from the International Hydropower Association's perspective, why this is important.
Yeah, thank you, Yanis, and thanks. This is really important. This is really important and really exciting. It's one of the few areas, well, one of the many areas, I should say, that our organisations can work together on, because it's clearly a problem across all the renewables. We need to be building faster, but not shortcutting. Typically, a hydropower project, from the moment it's announced, takes 15, 20 years. It's on typically 7 or 8 years in the process for getting a permit and license. If we take that long in the future, the train has left the station. We are not going to meet to net zero by 2050 on that timetable. Yet, the requirements of a lot of these licenses and permitting are particularly fair. We agree with most of it. We don't want a shortcut, and in fact, we want to do it better. The Hydropower Sustainability Standard is all about that working together across the various stakeholders to make sure that you're building and bringing people in. But it can be concertinaed. If you look at things like the UK vaccine task force, similar situation. Don't shortcut a vaccine. But you can do a lot of the approval processes in parallel rather than sequentially. There are a lot of solutions out there. That's what this Commission is looking at. That's why it's necessary to get those recommendations into policymakers. Thank you.
I'm going to hand back to you, Rebecca, for the second panel.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you to our speakers here. And next we have the second panel. So if they want to come up, and we've got a different moderator for this panel, so I'll pass on to my equally fantastic counterpart, Binu.
We'll just give people a minute to settle in. You folks can sit down. Rebecca, should we just get started? Yeah. Okay. Good morning, folks. My name is Binu Jakmar. I'm the director of clean electricity at the Pembina Institute. We're a nonprofit think tank working on clean energy policies based largely in Canada, but excited to join this panel here today and talk about some of the trends that are happening globally. Just earlier today, we had some, I think, great ambition setting by the previous panel as well as the presentation. Just got some, impressive targets that we have to meet. So just from that presentation, we saw that we need to go, in terms of renewable penetration in the grid, from 26% today to 65% by 2030. That's only 8 years away, and then 90% by 2050. So in this panel, we're going to explore some of the challenges that we're seeing in supply chains that could constrain us in terms of meeting those targets. But I also want to flip that and look at some of the opportunities we have. And I think that commission panel ended it in a positive note, like looking at what opportunities there are across the supply chain to also do development in a more responsible way that includes communities and environmental concerns in a better way than we've done with previous industry. So in my questions, you'll see I'll be constantly asking about what the role of government is in doing these things, as well as what the role of industry as developers, as well as other industries across the supply chain. And so to help us with that conversation, I think we have some amazing folks here with us. Just to my right here is Marta Martinez Sanchez, who is the head of special projects and analysis from Iberdrola. And then we have John Salazar, the CEO of Gazelle Wind Power. Thanks, John. And we have another John Lesamis, who's the global head of public affairs at Siemens Gamesa. Sorry, John, your last name, I'm still learning that, get the Spanish pronunciation. So we only have 30 minutes. I thought we'd just dive right in. You can look up their bios online. They're all famous folks. So I wanted to start with an obvious question. We've seen along with COVID lockdown, some of the industrial recovery that's been happening after the pandemic, the commodity price volatility. This has disrupted supply chains across a bunch of energy transition industries. And I was wondering if you folks could start with characterizing what the current state of supply chain is for wind, solar, and other sectors that are relevant to clean electricity. So maybe John Lesamis, if you could start us off.
Yes, thank you very much, and welcome to all of you that has had the chance to gather together with us in this very relevant panel on Energy Day at COP27 here in Sharm. The current situation that the entire supply chain is living, I think it is a complete paradox. The future has been, it is more ambitious than ever. I mean, we have higher targets than ever, even because of the geopolitical situation we are living. Every national government is lifting the wind targets as regards to wind specifically and other renewables. So again, the future is fantastic, but it is true that, first of all, because of the pandemic, second, because of the Ukraine war and high commodity and energy prices, and third, also, because of mainly price-driven auctions and market design, the entire supply chain is financially struggling. So this is the paradox. While we should be thinking into where to invest to meet the future targets, because you may have read the recent reports, last year reports by IEA and IRENA regarding the net zero. In order to become net zero by 2050, we have to at least quadruple the installations of renewables from now until earlier than 2050, because we have to achieve net zero by 2050. So last year, for example, in wind, it was 100 gigas. If we have to quadruple with the current capacity, manufacturing capacity, we the manufacturers, we should be investing into the future, but we cannot do it because we are financially struggling. So again, the momentum is crucial. Under the COP umbrella, I think that maybe the collaboration between the public and the private to understand which may be the opportunities and how to overcome the challenges, we will be in the right momentum to ease this debate going so.
Very inspiring words. John Salazar, I was wondering if you could also follow that up.
Excellent. A great pleasure to see you all. Welcome. Just to follow up on what John was saying, I agree. It is very, very relevant to keep that momentum going on. That's crucial, particularly for some of the new industries, offshore wind, that will play a huge role in addressing decarbonization goals. And to add further ideas to this discussion, what renewable energy and hydrogen are doing, and this has already started, is these are democratizing. They are making a democratization process of the electricity production. If in the last few decades we've seen a globalization and we've seen China and India as the fabrics of the world, now we are seeing that some trends are going in the complete opposite direction. And factors such as the COVID or the invasion of Ukraine by Russia and some of the geopolitical tensions that are happening in the other side of the world, in Southeast Asia, these are completely shifting the trends. So what we are seeing is an export of white-collar jobs and an import of blue-collar jobs. As an example, we are a technology provider at Gesell. We are introducing next generation of floating offshore wind foundations, and we've been working for the last few years with one of the main classification societies. We've been for the last year, every single week, speaking with one of the technical persons, and I thought this person was based in London, and after 2 years I realized the person is based in Brazil. So we are exporting these white-collar jobs, and this is very important for some countries that, although it may seem that they don't have wind potential or offshore wind potential, they may have experience in oil and gas or shipping or adjacent industries, and they could miss this big opportunity. On the other hand, we are seeing this regionalization. So we are seeing supply chains becoming local. We are seeing new local content rules, and this is a transition by itself. It's not that easy as introducing a policy. Bringing local supply chains, it will be a transition in itself as well. So we are seeing major trends. This come back to regionalization, and this is accelerating. This is accelerating very, very rapidly, and we need to maneuver.
Thanks, John. I want to come back to your local content rules in a bit, but I want to bring in Marta here to talk a little bit about what the role of government is in trying to unlock these supply chains.
Yeah, I think it's been now. Yeah. So I think it's come up in the previous panel. So the key thing for governments is to really define the framework so that all these investments can be deployed. I work for a utility based in Spain, but with a global reach for Iberdrola. And what we're looking for is really that stability and that certainty on the investments that we need to deploy. So enabling these frameworks means having targets, long-term, but also medium-term and short-term, having the regulation in place, having also a framework that enables PPAs and that gives us a visibility on the revenue schemes, and obviously, and it's come up a lot, it's also permitting and making sure that we can do that delivery on projects. So I think that for governments is really to define those conditions so that as developers we can come into the country and have that stability and that longer-term view, and bring in our people, have our headquarters, develop our pipeline, and work with suppliers and to deploy all that capacity and skills that are needed.
Fantastic. Thanks, Marta. Maybe to flip that a little bit too, so definitely hearing a lot of themes about certainty and reflected in the previous panel too. Maybe John, you can tell us a little bit about the role of developers like Iberdrola, like how can the rest of the industry also support and provide certainty to support supply chains?
No, absolutely. I mean, that's what said in the previous panel, that certainty is key, particularly for new innovative industries that will be crucial to achieve these decarbonization goals, floating offshore wind. And we can learn a lot from onshore wind in Europe, for instance. That was a successful story, but it was a painful one. It took too long to get to the levels as of today, where doing onshore wind deployments is cheaper than doing a combined cycle power plant. So it took too long. We don't have that time. We need to act with that sense of urgency as of today. For new industries, stimulus is needed. And it's that momentum we kick off this panel speaking about. We need to keep the momentum going on, so the industry it catches by itself. This is also very related to supply chain, because if we want to achieve these gigawatt scales, we need investment at several key parts. We need parts of the supply chain, the infrastructure, for instance. One thing is to do a few pilot projects for floating offshore wind, and a very different thing is to catch up with this demand. So that certainty is absolutely crucial in order to foster the investments for the supply chain to catch up. There is a scarcity of vessels, there is a scarcity of port infrastructure. All that needs to accelerate significantly.
Thanks, John. Just to change gears a bit, we keep talking about scaling up, and much of that is really good. But no energy development is without environmental impact. So when we're talking about quadrupling some of these, the renewable energy capacity, what are some of the innovations that are happening that can actually mitigate environmental impacts that might be associated with project development and across the supply chain? Are there some best practices and innovations that you can share?
Well, I mean, I can speak, and I guess that Marta and John, they will also have the points on this. I mean, from a wind turbine manufacturing point of view and how we are triggering our supply chain, you may be aware that wind energy is one of the least CO2 emitters, let's say, energy source along the entire life cycle of our products. So we are efficient, we are clean, we are powering our manufacturing facilities with green power as well. So I think we are, of course, there is still a path to be run and to be walked, but we are, let's say, we are not only delivering clean energy, but also in a sustainable way. As regards to your question of some of the innovations we are bringing in, for example, recyclable blade. Currently, turbines are above 80-85% recyclable, because the main component is steel. The main challenge has been up to date composites, blades, and some of the composites that are used, and we have two angles on that in the task forces that we have launched as regards to circular economy of composites. One is recyclability of the already installed base, so recycling the already manufactured composites and blades, and we are working on that. We have also coalitions in Denmark and how to reutilize the composites having been installed already. And the other angle that we have is from scratch, from design, make our turbines fully recyclable. And we have already launched back in 2021 offshore wind recyclable blade, and this year recyclable blade for onshore. There are already recyclable blades up and running in an offshore wind farm with one of our customers, RWE, in Kaskasi wind farm in Germany. So again, we are continuously innovation. I think that Ben Backwell stated a very, very bold and very clear message. We are not only the most competitive energy source already, but we are also the cleanest, and we are continuously improving that path.
Great example. I was wondering, if you want to add, John, please feel free to share another example. But then if you could also add what types of government policies and programs can also incentivize your industry to innovate along these lines.
So first of all, innovation is crucial. People assume that the technologies are there all the time. No, there's people working every day in pushing those technologies into the market. So innovation will play a huge role in addressing decarbonization goals, because supply chain needs to go hand in hand with innovation. At Gazelle, we want to introduce next generation of floating foundations. We are aiming to use 1/3 of the steel of mainstream solutions out there. The role of government is very important too, because that stimulus is needed. To pilot these new technologies, normally these are projects of dozens of millions of euros. I'm an entrepreneur. I started my company from scratch. And when you start something from scratch, and let's say to get to a point where O&Ms and developers start to listen to you, you need to deploy already several million euros, dozens of millions of euros. So that's a role where government could play a huge role. We've seen some initiatives. We've seen the Green Deal. The Green Deal it should cover also SMEs. there is a lot of talent, a lot of innovation, a lot of intelligence in small, medium enterprises that sometimes they are being forgotten in the equation. Having programs to connect with all the ecosystem, with R&D institutions, with universities. So the innovations, the technology readiness level can be improved, can move faster, because we don't have the time. We don't have the time to spend 10 years in developing this technology. We need to act with a sense of urgency. So further policies or further mechanisms to incentivize innovation will be very, very important.
Thanks, John.
Just to complete, to put on context, no? Some of the things we are doing, no one in humankind history has done that before. If we speak about floating offshore wind, we are doing skyscrapers that are floating. That for the latest wind turbines that John is developing for 50 megawatt, that can be as tall as the Eiffel Tower almost, can be as 300 meters. And we are placing these solutions floating on the middle of the sea, very rough seas, up to 20 meters height waves, and we need to keep them stable, because if they sway too much, the wind turbine operation will cease. So innovation is absolutely crucial, and sometimes people forget about the scale of these projects. These are, for floating, these are floating skyscrapers.
Yeah. No, thanks for that visual. I think when you see them on the ocean, it's hard to imagine how big they are in the real life. Marta, I'm wondering if you can come in from a developer perspective and also talk about what incentives from government are helpful for you to seek those type of innovative solutions.
I think first I'd like to highlight this technological revolution that we're seeing for the long number of years now, and it keeps on adding new areas where there's promising results coming up, no? Whether it's on existing technologies, but even having new ones and new foundations and new things. From our side as developers, we're fully engaged in bringing this forward. So, and we're fully committed to going on this path. We were speaking before about the crisis we're living today. So it's the energy crisis, the climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, and we just launched our new investment plan. So we're fully committed to accelerating this transition, to bringing this in. But we need more innovation, but there's a lot already that we need to do with what we have. So the technologies are there, and it's true that they keep on improving. And so we're working with our supply chain, trying to bring this technological innovations or improve performance online, working with local suppliers also to bring those skills in, and it was mentioned before on the permitting commission, to actually bringing the community, bringing those social values that the wind energy and wind energy, the transition and the clean energy in general has to bring it to our territories. And we're also exploring further new avenues for green products, committing to green steel zero, and trying also to push those frontiers of technology forward. In this, you were mentioning governments. I think that I said it before. So it's really creating those enabling conditions and really showing that signal that this is the way to go, and providing let's say the support that's needed in specific areas of the chain.
Amazing. That just makes me think how you can actually have an outsized impact on the economy. Like you can actually impact steel production depending on how you demand for the products that you're using. I want to pick up on another element you mentioned around social value. And yeah, it was really interesting to have the commission announced just before our panel, and seeing that they are going to be capturing some of these best practices for bringing communities along, developing social license. But I was wondering if you could share some of the leading best practices that you are seeing in some innovation in how you're engaging communities and ensuring that there is local economic development happening along with these projects, not just at the project level, but also looking at the supply chain.
I think social acceptance is key going forward. We're seeing the numbers, no? We have to quadruple investment, and our targets are becoming more and more stringent. And in this energy transition, what happens also is that energy consumers will have those impacts closer. So now when we consume based on fossil fuels, you probably have the facility somewhere far away, maybe in another country, you don't see those externalities. When you go into a cleaner energy mix or a cleaner energy system, you have the renewable facility is probably is closer to you. So you have the two combination. You have the externalities coming onto your backyard, let's say, and you have more targets. So it's key that we work on social acceptance, that we make sure that society understands the benefits, because we're going to it's a better energy system, it's cleaner, it's less polluting, it's good for a biodiversity, has less impact there also, it can bring in socioeconomic benefits around us. So it's really important to work on that and to engage those communities early in the process. So, and also the other variable to complete the triangle there is biodiversity. So we have to get this right. So we have to go, we have to do this and accomplish this energy transition. That's, I think no one has doubts about that, but we have to get those three elements right. So the transition, the society, and biodiversity. And what we're trying to accomplish that, we've made those two values, society and nature, center values in our new investment plan and a new climate action plan. And we're trying to engage with those communities, work with them from the very beginning and trying to improve our projects, learn from each other and work together. As John was mentioning, we don't have time to lose. So it's really a matter of getting to work and trying to get things done, basically.
Thanks. I think you outlined the imperative really well there, better than civil societies often do. But I was actually wondering among the panel if any of you folks could share some practical examples of how you've seen that happen on the ground. So we can visualize it too. I think you had an example, John, on floating.
Yes. Well, a few days ago, I was in Japan, in Akita, a great event organized by GWEC, in fact. And Japan is a country that has 130,000 fisheries. And the seas are very, very crowded elements. And if we want to do offshore wind projects, floating offshore wind projects, we need to engage early with these fisheries. Otherwise, marine ecosystems can be, these dynamics can be changed and will be changed. So that's a very, very clear example of very early engaging with the fisheries, making them understand that also this is very important with the increased level of pH and acidity on seas. We need to move to renewables very, very rapidly, because otherwise they will be disrupted, they will be impacted negatively as well. So again, it all boils down again to supply chain, to technology, to those policies. Spatial marine planning will be a key area. That's a very good example of an area where the governments need to work together with energy developers, with all the different local economies. You can see also the projects in marine exploration, tourism, defense. So seas are becoming very crowded, and marine spatial planning is an example of this. We need to work and engage very early.
If I may, I think that one important element to what Marta and John were explaining, although we may be considered a mature technology, wind, and we are, of course, but we have still a long run, because as you know, we are currently willing to unleash the full potential of renewables by coping with green hydrogen, how we are going to be collaborating together with solar and storage. So this is not only just about one technology, this is about the entire different renewables, including hydro, etc., biomass and geothermal. But for me, one crucial element under the current geopolitical momentum is energy security. We have been delivering wind technology and wind power for the last 30 years. We know how to cope with local communities. We know how to protect the environment. We know how to protect biodiversity. We are experts on that. I mean, if we are delivering green energy, we are the first ones interested in such delivery being also green in the entire value chain. But it is true what Marta was saying, that social awareness has to be increased. It may be also our fault, between brackets, because we haven't been able to share information and best practices about how much benefit we bring to local communities. But again, the energy security element is crucial, because as Marta was saying, some years ago, you didn't care about where your electricity or energy was coming from. Currently, you should care, first of all, whether it is green or it is not green. Second, who is controlling the power production of such electricity that you are consuming. So what we are fostering from a renewables perspective is clean, competitive, and domestic energy, so that every single region in the world can become energy self-sufficient, and hopefully, because of the vast renewable sources the region may be endowed with, export and get additional revenues as well. So again, I think that the momentum is crucial for just letting policymakers aware about what we from the private sector need to enact the appropriate policies to unleash the full potential of renewables.
Yeah, no, fully supportive of that. I think there definitely needs to be better education of policymakers on that. I think this might be our last question, but I wanted to pick up on the point you made, John, about local benefits of domestic manufacturing. You're saying that there's regional policies happening for supply chain. And the one that comes to my mind is the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. Clearly a fantastic boost to the renewable energy industry and clean sector in many ways, but we also know it's being challenged. So, what is the way through that? Like, how do you navigate sort of the benefits it brings and like how it can boost energy industry in a way that has never happened before, but also tackling some of these supply chain challenges? John, you're smirking, so maybe we'll start with you.
Okay. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, has been a great, let's say, the showcase from the US government about the commitment to deliver green energy, clearly. I think that the expectation that they have created among investors and around the industry is just fantastic. But I would say that shouldn't be raising the awareness from other regions in the world. Collaboration is crucial. There is going to be, again, looking into the installation needs for becoming net zero, we have to quadruple the installations. There is going to be room for investing in the US. There is going to be room for investing in EU. But of course, again, because of the situation that investors and the local manufacturing is suffering from a financial point of view, we need tax stimulus in order to bring these new capacities. So the IRA represents an opportunity. The Power EU and the Recovery and the Resilience Fund in the EU also represent other opportunities for the local manufacturing. So again, we may agree that the current momentum from renewables may trigger development of local manufacturing, because it does and it should, but the competitiveness we have reached currently is also thanks to global competitive supply chains. So we should be keeping in parallel the global competitive supply chains by means of, for example, creating green tech corridors, collaboration of exchange of raw materials, commodities, so we can deliver in time and competitively the energy transition together, living together with these tax stimulus policies that may be fostering local manufacturing. Because you may think, we as wind turbine manufacturers, our 15 megawatt turbines, they are Goliaths. They are Leviathans, they are monsters. It wouldn't make little sense to ship them all around the world rather than market forces fostering local manufacturing, fostering training, local reskilling. So I think rather than a challenge, it should be an opportunity for different regions to collaborate.
To add a couple of further thoughts, it's another example of that regionalization with increased local content rules and in terms of solutions, because in some places it's a big gap. In some countries you can see 60% local content rule, and no way, shape, manner, or form you can fulfill that in time, aligned to the roadmaps. Some solutions or ideas, of course, we are seeing revamping, we are seeing reuse of existing assets, and that's a good practice. If you are in a specific region, that region is strong in oil and gas or in maritime or shipping industry or fisheries, there may be very adjacent industries, and those skills and infrastructure could be transferred. Now, that's not always the case. Some of these are new industries, and as said before, there are gaps. We need new port and infrastructure. Where are these solutions going to be manufactured? The solutions that John was now alluding to. Even from a technology point of view, does the port has enough draft? Because if they don't have enough draft, we may need to do local assembly in another place. So this is happening. This type of all this is being sought, is moving. But now what we need is speed, speed, speed. Of course, we can revamp assets, we can reuse existing assets, but we need to act with a sense of urgency in order to achieve these goals in time. So that would be the key for me. The message is speed, speed, speed. We need to move quickly with a sense of urgency.
I was just going to add to that, or to maybe as just my wrap up. Let's say that I agree totally with speed with, and I would add to speed. I would add commitment across all the levels, and I would add collaboration. I think that all this is what we need to scale up the supply chain and to really to accelerate transition, accelerate the progress.
I think that's a great way to end the panel. Let's move fast and let's move together. Thank you everyone for your participation here, and thanks folks for listening. Take care.